Welcome to the McSherryStudio. Don't forget to click the like button and also subscribe to this YouTube channel, and that way you'll get notifications of new painting videos as I post them up, and you can do both using the buttons below here. If you like the paintings that are done in these demonstrations, you can always acquire one, and you can do that on my website, McSherryStudio.com, and there's a link in the description below. So otherwise, paint oils, paint small, and paint often. Right, today is wine week. It's just I'm theming weeks just because it makes it more interesting for people, and it's the summer, and we should be painting summery things. And wine, as they say, is bottled sunshine, don't they? All right, so that's what we're going to paint, and I'll show you the palette that I'm going to use, and it's a simplified palette. So what we have here is titanium white, cadmium yellow light, permanent rose, cobalt blue, and usually I would use this one here, which is burnt umber, but today I'm going to be using burnt sienna because we're talking about warmth here, sunshine, and that's grayer than this. This is redder than that, but they're both earth colours and they're good for making a wash and a drawing. So I'm using burnt sienna today. We have ivory black here, and ivory black is useful for making shadows, especially when you're learning to paint. You can use black, but it kind of it makes sort of quite dull shadows. And since we're doing a sunny painting, we want lively shadows. So that's our palette, and we're back to here. So the first thing I'm going to do is put a wash on a substrate. I've got a frog in my throat. Must be all this French stuff. And so the first thing we can do is put a wash on. So let me go back to the palette. This is turpentine, and this is linseed oil. And I'll show you. We'll be using sort of a little bit of linseed oil into the paint, especially at the beginning, because you know, we want the paint to be thin at the beginning, and then we start moving towards what they call fat paint. So basically means more viscous, neat paint as we go on, because you're risking, if you don't do it that way, if you start putting on thick paint first of all and then putting thin paint over it perhaps in places, is the thin parts on top will start cracking because they'll have different drying times. So you paint in oils fat over lean. That's what they call it, fat over lean. So I've just put a whole load of terps down for this part, getting a little bit of burnt sienna. Make sure it's about the consistency of milk or something like that. There's a bit of resistance to it because it's quite solid. Bit more there. So there's no need to be an obsessive completist about this, because you know it's just a wash. It's just the background, and the fact that you've put a wash on means several things. It has, you know, implications. Like first of all, you're not staring at a blank canvas anymore, which is great. There's nothing worse than you know, looking at this thing, accusing you of either not painting it or you know, whatever, not thinking right, not getting down to work. The next thing it's good for, and it's good for several things, is that now we've brought our canvas or our support down to the you know, the tonal range of the palette. So it's kind of easier to judge your colours. Palette and then substrate, the surface we're going to paint on. The next thing this is good for is to actually create the opportunity for happy accidents. So if we don't actually manage to paint, or we miss bits out as we're painting, and this shows through. It's not white. If white was showing through, it would look harsh and horrible and incomplete. But when you've got a wash down, it shows through as this red. And if you're painting greens, it kind of reacts with the green paint in the sort of, with the senses rather than an actual physical reaction. It just provides something that is unintentional. So you've got this red poking through where the green is. It actually looks really, really nice. So what we've got a bunch of grapes, quite dark. We've got the bough, you know, the woody part of the vine coming across in the top left and top right there a little bit. The rest is green. Then we've got this blank space down below, and I want to use that to show something else in the background. At the moment, it's a real depth of field photograph, isn't it? That I don't know how you set the depth of field on a camera, but I can just see it there. Is that everything beyond that vine is blurred because the focus is right in on those grapes. But we don't have to do that. We're painters, and we also want to say, well, you know, this is set amidst lovely fields and hilly country, isn't it? Sort of, it's facing a certain direction. I don't know what it is. Our vineyard's facing south, could be. We want to paint what we want to paint, so it's going to be a composition, a composite of different things. Okay, so I'm going to start drawing, and I'm going to draw with my burnt sienna. So it's the same colour that I put on as a wash, but now it's a bit stronger. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to divide my canvas. So I'm going to do it in that sort of vaguely Renaissance way. So now I can sort of tell where I am, and I'm looking at that bunch of grapes, and it's sort of it's set. The edge is set on the third actually. So if I had I can tell where the third is now. So the edge of the grapes is set there. The bottom of the grapes is set round about there. We've got this kind of Africa shape, haven't we? Sort of coming down. The bough, that vine, is coming across, coming down to about the third across, and then down there. We're only using this as a kind of a model for our painting, the composition that we want to make. Okay, so we've got more grapes round about here, which is there, and then we've got the vine leaves coming down there. We're trying to paint this as if we're there, not slavishly following the photograph. Okay. And we've got some more of that vine coming across there. Okay, so that's it. Now I'm going to actually do this as a bit of a what they call a notan. So we've got a drawing there, and now we're going to turn it into a notan. And a notan is a kind of a schematic tonal drawing. So it's just a way of establishing your design after the drawing. So it's in between a drawing and an underpainting. Okay, so we're going to come up there like that. We've got dark here, dark there. That's all basically a tone there. Everything else is incidental around here. It's light green, bit of a, right. Coming up there. That leaf there is reasonably dark. Now, the thing is, right, is that I thought that we could sort of add something to this, because we're telling a story, or I want to tell a story anyway. I don't want to just say that, well, here's a bunch of grapes on a vine, which could be anywhere. We could kind of set it in context, okay? This is the kind of thing that you can do if you want to create paintings that are more you. This is one of the things that you can do, okay? One of those things is we can add in something that will just add a little bit of interest. So I thought that this church set in the countryside would be a nice thing to do. So it's as if we're up on the hillside, sort of looking down at this scene in front of us. Okay, and we're going to make it smaller. We're not going to make it huge like the way the church is. So that church is going to be off in the distance there. Maybe bring it over here a little bit. Okay, and that means there's kind of mountains, very, very distant mountains there, off into the off into the distance there. Let me just get a rag. Oh, that's something very important to have as well. You should never start painting without a rag in your hand. You need that. Look at the state of it. That's a work of art in itself. It's also not very pliable anymore. But so we have this this little church. In the distance. So that's what we're going to do. So all the hills in the background. That hill there, and then we've got the leaves coming down. Let's go back to the oops. Yeah. All right, so let's start this first. We'll start with those grapes, which is a purple. Okay, so let's make a purple. With blue, permanent rose, cobalt blue, permanent rose. We'll do the kind of darker parts first. So we'll just use it as a pure blue and permanent rose, first of all. Okay? I'm just going to put a little bit of oil into that just to help it move around. Okay, and we're going to put that in first there where we see it. That comes in through that bough. That's all thin, you know, that's all pretty thin. And up above is there's some dark parts here. There, that's another bunch of grapes. Perhaps it's even the same bunch of grapes. It can't be. Anyway, no, it's the second one. So we've got this dark part here. Let's get that branch in. What will we do for the branch? It's a dark reddy grey. I think it's a better way of describing it than, say, a brown branch. Okay, so it's a greys you can make out of all the three colours together. The three primaries, the yellow, the red, and the blue, plus a little bit of white. That will make your greys. You don't make greys out of black and white. You can make a kind of a perfect grey out of black and white, but it's harsh. Two cold colours that aren't really sort of colours at all. So you need colourful greys. They've got to be. You think of greys in terms of temperature, okay? So let's get a bit more blue into that, into the dark part. Okay, I'll put that in first. I'm sure you've had the interior decorators into the house sometimes, and they always start going on about colour temperature as it applies to your home. Well, it's the same in paintings. So we're going to just block that in according to our drawing. That goes up there like that. Bit there. That goes over to those grapes there. There's something dark there. And we've got a little sort of little bar of vine coming out there. Okay, so there are our vines. Let's do a bit of the foliage now. So there's some really light greens. There's some dark bluer greens, a little light green next to it, and then there's a light blue green here. So it's just a kind of a mess of green. So I'm going to make up a standard green first, and then work into it. All right, so yellow and blue makes a green, obviously. But it always makes a kind of a bit of a harsh green, actually. So Actually, it's not too bad. It's not too bad. It seems to suit what we're doing. I think I'll keep that as my green this time. Yes, and I'll add into that in the places where I need to add. So I'm just going to put in bits where I see it. Up there. See, I'm not being specific. I'm not painting leaves. I'm just painting areas of colour, because we can always work into these later, and that makes for more spontaneous paintings, not stilted. When you start painting, drawing out the leaf and then painting up to the lines, like they tell school children to do, it makes for stilted looking paintings. I added a little bit of blue into this just to darken this one, the cobalt blue. I don't want to come down too far, like and then affect how that little church that we've got in the background is going to be. So I'm just getting that's a bit darker there. Okay. Then there's a really bright green off to the right. Sun is catching that part there. The sun is catching that. So we'll probably have to darken this one as well. Now there's that light pale greenish blue, so a bit more white, a bit more blue into that same green. So I'm working off the same green. I made a kind of a general purpose green, and then I'm working either of the colours into it. And that in there, we'll put that in there. All we want to do is get a profusion of colour. It's an optical illusion. It fools the eye. Where do I see it? I can see it there as well. Across there. And up there. Okay. Let's put in, there's a darker green that I could put in as well. So more blue into it. And that goes in there. All the kind of detailing is going to be put in after. Now that I've got my blue in, I can fill that in as well. Okay, so now we've got that part blocked in. I think that we should go and just sort of do something with that background, that church, okay? So in fact, the church, the very far background is the same. It's the same kind of tone as what was in the vines photograph anyway. It's a very, very, very pale green, because you can tell that in the background would be vines and stuff like that. It wouldn't necessarily be sky. So let's come back here and then we'll put that in there. I just want to bring that down to about there. There. So we've got our church there. Let's put that. Well, it's kind of, maybe it's in Les Vosges or something like that, where my father-in-law comes from. There's a kind of an autumnal colour there. I suppose I presume that the grapes are picked in the late summer, early autumn. I don't know. I've never done it. I've only ever picked oranges before. So get rid of that. Let's go back. Sorry, to the church again. I just want to see what that's like. Now the church is a kind of grey. We don't want to be absolutely pernickety about that church. Okay, so I'm just going to put in. What will I put in? A light sort of warm grey. Okay, and that can be our church there, like that. We just get the general shape in. We don't want to direct people's attention to the church. It's kind of more the foreground. They can go up there like that. Oil painting is about sculpture. It's not about it's not about drawing up to lines. So there's some mountainous terrain there. And it continues down slightly lighter beyond the church. That's another crest of a hill there. And then beyond it, very light green, but it's darker than here. It's darker than the sky, but lighter than the church and its surroundings. So let's make, and let me tell you, it almost doesn't matter what colour you paint it. It's the tone that makes the painting. So if you wanted to paint, like last week, we all painted our gardens or whatever. If you wanted to paint your entire scene in tones of red, it would still work. Okay, so this is the land that's beyond, disappearing off into the distance. Okay. And have that coming there. So in a sense, it's a bit of a fantasy. Okay. All this sort of, I don't know, it's autumnal grapes, isn't it, that's on the hill that's in front. Okay, but we don't want that necessarily. We want it to be, I think that what would support this painting most is a kind of an autumnal scene. So I'm going to put a little bit of green in there, just a little bit of green. These are the vines, in fact. But most of it I'm going to put in that sort of harvest red colour. Okay, you can always work into that later. As I say, the colours are less important, far less important than the tone. Okay, we're almost finished our blocking in. Let me see, that comes in there, that's a wine. So right, we have finished our blocking in now. We're going to be working into this all these general tones. So I'm going to change my brush actually. I'm going to change my brush to this. This is a filbert. Okay, so it's slightly rounded, but it's still flat. So there's a dark coming down here, and it kind of pokes out a little bit, so we can actually take care of that now. Add a little bit of yellow into the blue and red mix, because that'll just make it darker again, okay? It'll give it a punch. So here we go. Okay. And just where I see the darkest darks, I'm going to put them in. Okay, so here. It's a bit reddy. I'm going to add a bit of blue to that. Just going to put in little sort of indications where. So now this composition is no longer the photograph, which is great because we don't want to be just churning out other people's photographs all the time. We want our own paintings. This is a way of making it into ours. Join those up a little bit. This is all dark in here, quite dark indeed, but we don't have to go as dark as it is. Actually, we can sort of play around with it. That can come down there like that. Still not doing sort of, I'm not doing specific strokes. Let's do something with the vine. So I'm going to add a little bit of grey into that vine. Okay. So we want to differentiate it from the grapes. That's red up there. Just putting in little sort of strokes, general still, you know, they're not sort of, they're not specific strokes, again. I should try sort of and find a simile for specific, but now I'm painting, I just can't think of anything. So now let's do something with the that bluish. There's a bloom, isn't there, on grapes? I don't know what. I know something about the nobility of the grapes. Isn't it something? There's yeast on it or something. So I'm just going to add in. So this is more viscous paint now. So this is no longer washy. And I'm going to put those in across there like that. This is a ready sort of colour, but I'm actually going to go and put in blues next. And a bit the same here, but you can't see that as much. That's much darker in there. And across here a little bit. And now the bluey parts. I'm going to put the mix blue into the same mix, just to show you. I should show you, shouldn't I? This was the dark of the grapes, and then I made a kind of a reddish version, which you can just see on the side there. And now I've mixed blue and white into it here. Okay, into the same original mix, because it's all based around the same thing. It's all the same object, in a way. And I'm just going to put in dabs. You're not going to start painting individual grapes. Because that way, you know, you'd be here a month of Sundays and it still mightn't look right. So keep it dabby. Abu Dhabi is the watchword of the day. Stick that in there. So now we're starting to get a kind of a sense of depth in there. Okay, we're bringing things forward. That's what oil painting is about. It's about generalities and then bringing it forward, the whole thing into clarity. Not working on one part of the painting until you finished it and then moving on to the next part of the painting, because that won't work. Okay, now I'm going to add some sort of darks into those branches. Now, do you remember I said about shadows and not using black? Well, you could, any of these colours, you could mix black into it and make the shadow version of what you want to paint. But we want to make a kind of a brighter, more showy painting, more like the Impressionists did. And the Impressionists tended to use just those colours to make their shadows. So I'm going to make the shadow of the vine. So it's basically all three colours. You mix them until you get the desired effect. So more red, more blue. I get very dark that way. Put that in where I see the shadows. So here, I'm painting in to the wet paint, and that you often hear that called wet into wet. That's what we're doing, wet into wet painting. Or alla prima, because alla prima has to be wet into wet. Okay, I'm going to put in a nice line down there. Have it there. And this way, when we start putting in these darks, we can start to get the sense that it's three-dimensional. Okay, dark in there. And then there's some greys. There's some greys in that. They're reddy greys. I'm going to mix some yellow and red and white into that same colour. Okay, and I'm going to start sort of putting in just kind of random strokes in the general area of where I see them without filling everything in. So it's got to look kind of knobbly, hasn't it? That's what the effect that we're going for. That it looks knobbly. The wood of the vine is a kind of a knobbly wood. And then there's some light, cool parts. I'll show you what I mean in a second. I'll just mix some blue and white. Here, for example, you can see around here there's some light, cool parts. So I'm just going to, and here as well, put that in there, there, there. Now we've got to do something more with the vines, with the leaves, I should say. So we're going to mix up some more green, yellow, because I don't have enough left, and blue. But this time we're not putting any oil or terps into it. We're going to use it much more neat than we did before. Okay. That's pretty good there. Okay. Maybe a little bit lighter. Okay. Okay, so here it's the very randomness of all of this. The kind of, the absolute, how do you say, the hodgepodge of tones and colours that fools the eye into thinking, well, that's all leaves, isn't it? Because that's what leaves are like. You can't generally, unless you go up close, distinguish one leaf from another. And you don't want the viewer to be honing in on individual bits. You want to direct their eye where you want it to go, which is the grapes, really, and maybe the church. But the church is only interesting because it's in a sort of supporting role, putting the whole thing into context. This is the story we're telling. It's no longer just a painting from a photograph. We're saying what we want it to say at this stage. Okay, so there's that kind of a bluish green there, coming down into a darker green. I'm just going to add some blue into that and red into that green that I made and bring that in there as well. Not being too specific. This is an impressionist painting. Okay, so now we've got a profusion of greens, which is what you'd expect. What we don't have are any reds. So we want to link all this with this, because we've said, oh well, it's very sort of autumnal, or at least sort of early harvest. So I'm going to add in some parts where the leaves might be turning, where I see it, because then that links it in with what's going on beyond it in here. Okay, and then likewise we can put some more green in here. This is incidental, all this area here. Okay. I've got a spider crawling up my neck. Right. So let's work on the background again. Where are we? Background, which is the church. Let's have a look at what was going on in the church again. Okay. Let's build up these hills a little bit more. And we're sending them right into the background because they're distant. There's a huge body of air between us and those faraway mountains. So I've just made a pale mix, okay? So we're now working with a kind of a more viscous paint into the background, okay? Let's... So these are our faraway hills. Push that into there. Pull that up there. Okay, and then we've got some we've got the closer hills here, so I'm going to add a little bit of blue and green, actually, I think, into that same mix. Let's see what that does. Here. Actually, do you know what? I'm going to send it further away. Put a bit more white and a bit more blue into it. A touch of red. Let's see what happens there if I do that. Okay. Oh yeah, that looks better. So there's this profusion of stuff here. I think it's kind of a village. It's probably the village below the church, you know, that you often get in these kind of mountainous regions. Random. It's not too obviously and obvious and specific. Stuff there. There's a corresponding mountain coming along here. It's not that all this will be sort of one flat tone along there. Okay, so now we've got sort of hills, and we better do something with that church. Okay, so we're painting into this, and we've got a darkish. That corresponds, in fact, nicely with the grapes. So we can have the spire going up into there. That's fine. There. The roof is kind of dark. There's a grey there. Stuff coming outside of the church there. A bit dark as it comes down there as well. And warmer on the right hand side, so I'll add a little touch of white, yellow and red here. I'm not sure what that is. I can't see it closely on the photograph anyway. Okay, and now let's shape the church. We'll shape it with the background hill sort of tone first. This is how you achieve shapes, not by painting up to lines. It's not about, painting up to lines. It's about sculpture. Sculpt that in there. Sculpt that in there. Sculpt that a little bit. Actually, we might sort of lighten that a little bit. Okay, so sculpt the church roof there. Sculpt it there. You can sculpt it from underneath there. Okay, and now we'll have to do something about the sky. Let me change brushes again. So I've got white and a bit of yellow there. Whatever will make that a bit of red. That could be quite nice. We don't have to stick with what's in the photograph. We paint what we think will make the painting look better. Okay, so I've got a kind of a slight pink there, slightly, a very, very light, warm pink. So now we're going to shape around here. And there we can shape the grape. Shape that grape there into there. Sculpture. Or whittling is probably a better way to think of it. You're whittling the thing down with the edge of the brush, just dipping into the going across into it there, look, like pushing the thing away, pushing the paint around. It's amazing how much sculpture you can actually do. You can change shapes radically with using oil paints. Into there, up there. Okay. So now we kind of have leaf shapes that we can press. Let's get a bit of sky in there, a bit of sky in here. We can sculpt our leaves. There, look, just sort of little sort of flicks into the thing. That'll shape our leaves. Although we'll be coming back into that from the other side as well. So we'll be painting into that leaf a bit more, I think. Okay, and there's the mountains there. And we need to do something with that church, don't we? So we're gonna, well, I can't remember what the church looks like. It's a very pointy spire, isn't it? Okay, so I'm just going to use my finger as a mile stick. See what I mean? You can see my little finger there. I'm pivoting around it there. So that's going to keep my hand steady. Because I don't have a particularly steady hand. Up. Cut into there. Cut into there. Bring that. And you can lose the edges as well. There's the lost edges in painting. It's very effective. It sends things away into the distance to not have particularly hard edges. Okay, we've got, what was that there? That needs to be there. That's leaves as well. We can serrate the edge of those leaves there like that. More sculpting. I don't think you have to be particularly accurate with that, because now we've got a general church shape, and I'm a bit afraid to ruin the thing by going in too close. Maybe I can come back in later and just sort of tip that a bit. But I do want to lighten the church a little bit away from the background. I'm just going to add a little bit of white, make a light warm grey. And just sort of that comes down there like that. Dabs, don't be sort of being too descriptive. And oils are so forgiving anyway that you could sort of go back and just tease it into position afterwards. I'm going to put a bit of darker stuff around the church, just to help the church stand off a little bit better. Even though the church isn't really the point of this painting, we'll treat it a little bit. There. Okay. But it's quite good because the slope is that way, and obviously this vine is on our slope. So that kind of makes sense. So I'm going to put even in lighter parts. Let me just show you the palette. So you can see this area here. I've just put some white onto it. So I'm going to make lighter parts, but it's going to give myself a bit more paint. Basically, this is a white, blue, and red mix. Okay. So we're going to try and sort of put lighter areas on some of these grapes, but not being overly descriptive. It It is a random thing. And even up here, there's a couple of quite light things there. And in here. Because now we're going to have to go back. Oh, there's some nice pinks. I'm going to put some pinks in, okay? Just adding permanent rose and white into that same mix. We're pushing the mix around from warm to cool, cool to warm, from dark to light, and from hue to hue. That should be redder. Red in there, maybe in bits in there. Okay, and now I need some darks in amongst those grapes. Okay, so I'm going to make that that grape dark again. To blue, red. I'm going to put yellow in there as well. Because all I'm after is a dark. It's really kind of hard to distinguish what the dark is. You see what I mean? You put a bit of yellow into it, it kind of makes it brownish. But really it's just you're just using all the colours together to make a dark. There's a predominance of blue, there's a lot of red, there's a small amount of yellow to make that dark. And in painting, obviously, you talk about darks. You don't talk about blacks and all that kind of stuff, because you try not to use black. Okay? So this is dark here. It's all dark around there. Goes dark coming around there like that. You're kind of giving the impression that there are grapes closer to us and farther away. They're starting to take on their sort of the roundness now. But you don't want to you don't want to start drawing circles. Really, you don't. You're just going to give an impression that there are spheres all gathered together like that. See, I'm pushing the paint around, pushing it out there. Pushing that around. There's quite a lot of paint on that now. It's quite, how would you say, impasto. And here as well, this is all quite dark here. So we don't need to be so specific here. Just it's an optical illusion. It's just a profusion of tones and dabs, giving the impression that there's something there. It's like the artist Chris Foss, who did all the preparatory sketches for Star Wars, said, you put in a lot of detail, it gives the illusion of function, and that's what's going on here as well. Push that there like that. So now we have grapes there. Add in a little bit more there. But we're still not going to finish this before moving on, because alla prima painting, you don't finish one area before everything else. So you're bringing everything into clarity. Okay, so now there's something I would like to do that I think might help the painting. You might disagree, but I'm going to do a little bit of delineation. Because after all, it's an impressionist painting. And it kind of gives the illusion that there's more going on than we actually can see. Okay, so because it's almost like a childish thing, a childlike thing, is that you ask a child to draw a leaf and they'll draw a leaf. You know, they'll just draw this standard leaf-shaped number 1 that they'll draw, and they're doing it because they're just trying to convey the story of leaf. And kind of as adults, we forget to be able to do that, but cartoonists don't. You know, cartoonists are forever simplifying things, and they say, well, you know, man is just a round blob with a kind of lines of a face stuck onto it. And I think we can learn a bit from that as painters, you know, to not be so pernickety and to just sort of give impressions, shorthand in a way. You know, who wants to be Rembrandt? You know, there already was a Rembrandt. This way you can actually be more yourself, even if you use a photograph. Some push that in there like that. Just random strokes there. There's some stalks of the grapes. They're there too, and I'm going to put those in kind of quite thick impasto paint, because you need to load your brush when it gets to this stage, so that the paint will sit on, because you're leaving it onto the surface of the paint. You're not brushing it on. Okay, so I'm just leaving the paint on, and I'm making it more red than it actually is, because I think it suits the painting. And you don't mess with these once you put them down, otherwise you'll mess it up a little bit. You'll flatten everything. You don't want to flatten. There's not sure where that one was going, but we can come one through there as well. And now we've got sort of vegetation. We've got sort of stuff going on that people know should be there, but they're not sure why it should be there. More delineation, I think. Now it's almost at the stage where I'm not looking at the photograph anymore, because it won't help. It'll only hinder you to keep looking at the photograph. Delineations, giving the impression that things are going on. Okay, back to the grapes. Yes, okay. So there's reflected light going on here. Let me see. I can't really show you. I can show you on this, but you'll have a look at it on the photograph there. Is that there's light hitting them from up here. You can see it. There's kind of reflections of light on the tops. But then the light is going down and it's bouncing back up, and you can see it just underneath some of the grapes. So it's worth putting that in as well, in a few spots. Just to sort of amplify the fact that they're round. Profusion of tones and hues, and lighter up here. Okay, and around here is not very. Let's do something with that, just that big leaf here. Right, with that, go back to our green. Just going to put some. Okay, move that around. Okay, let's do something with the this area here. So I'm going to delineate that as well. I'm going to make that redder in places as it comes around here, just for effect. Put a bit more yellow into it. Close that up a bit. A bit more green into it there, just to. Okay, I want to do something more with that church. Vegetation in front of it, for a start. Darker than that. Okay, and then maybe I'll just sort of put that pink down there. That means I can sort of shape these a little bit. And that paleness should give the illusion of distance. Push that over there a little bit. That's push that. Let's go back to the grapes. We can break up some of the edges. Just break up now, not flatten. We're not blending. Go in there, push that out. Push that out a little bit. Push that out. Push that out. Push that out. With the illusion that there's lots of these scrapes there. And just to finish, I'm just going to add something into the sky, just to texture. Texture there. Gonna shake that back a little bit. It's a little bit lonely out there. I'm not looking at the photograph anymore. It's not necessary. So there you go. That is a composite of two photographs. So you can say to yourself that you painted a painting that's your painting and not just a copy of a photograph, so that you can see it.
That's brilliant. Okay. Excellent. Lovely. Really, really enjoyed it.
Okay, so let me see if you can move it around. There's a very bright, oh, there we go. That's easier. Just so that you can see the texture, because it's quite important, I think, to know that you're not flattening.
Yeah.
And that you're using dabs and you're building up a mosaic of color rather than, yeah.
Oh, I love that.